Jonnie was the first student that I'd like to talk about. Was a student who came to me when I was a special ed teacher with an educational mentally handicapped class. That was the title they gave it. I know it keeps changing, but that was the name of that class at that point. And I had 14 very large, very strong boys, and they were not excited about Jonnie coming into the class. I was asked if I would accept Jonnie as a student because he spoke Spanish and I could work with him in learning to speak English. Very shortly after Jonnie arrived, I realized that Jonnie did not speak at all. He had no language. I had never worked with a child who had no language, and Jonnie was 12 years old. It was a real challenge, and I had no idea how to begin. And for some reason, I happened to see a movie about a boy who was institutionalized and had no language. And the teacher realized that he was very smart because she noticed that he followed her with his eyes everywhere she went. And he began to imitate her when she would respond to him. And I noticed the same behavior in Jonnie. And I thought, Jonnie might be much more intelligent than he seems to be, and his records indicate. Jonnie came to the class from a trainable program where I'm not sure how much stimulation he had or how many opportunities to be exposed to literacy. And I found out that his parents had been told, I believe from what they told me from doctors, that Jonnie could not produce language, and so they had never encouraged him. And he was the youngest of 9 children, and he had all of the other children to help him and do for him and take care of him, so he had no need to talk. When the other children saw Jonnie pointing and making sounds, they became very upset, and they started hitting him. And I told them they could not do that their job was to help him learn how to speak English because he had learned to speak Spanish. And within a short amount of time, they had taught him to say things like bathroom and lunch and book. And I was amazed at how quickly Jonnie had acquired language. And I kept a record of all of the new words that he learned to say. And there were by the end of the year, about 300 words that he could say and people could understand. We then began to teach him how to read. So we would have cards, and this helped the other children too. The cards would say things like chair and desk and chalk and chalkboard, and Jonnie would place those cards in the right places. So at that level we would have to say that he was reading, even though he never took a book and read from it. He didn't write. He would take a pencil. By the end of the year, he would begin to hold a pencil, but when we tried to get him to write his name or to make marks, he would draw back and drop it. So if we use the technical idea of literacy as marking and writing and indicating things with letters, he never learned to write. But if we think of literacy in the larger picture of ability to see symbols and recognize them and relate them to objects and to communicate understandings, Jonnie was beginning to become a literate person. At the end of that year, I moved to a different class in a different school, and Jonnie went back to the trainable program. And even though I tried to encourage them to continue the literacy development that Jonnie had acquired, for whatever reasons that I don't know, that stopped. And I saw Jonnie then the following year. His bus used to stop in the school where I was, and I could see him in the bus when I would have bus duty. So I saw him in August, and I hadn't seen him since June. And I went up to the bus, and he was yelling my name, and he was waving out of the window, "Mrs. Fratty! Mrs. Fratty!" And I got on the bus, and he hugged me. "Oh, Mrs. Fratty!" I felt really, really excited about Jonnie. He was still talking. And then I saw him in October, and I saw him kind of go like that when he looked out the window. He was sort of like almost waving, but not really. And I got on the bus, and he looked up at me, and he's like, "Mrs. Fratty." But he was almost like he didn't know if he should say hello or if he shouldn't, if he was like really with me or he was someplace else. And I saw him again in January, and I said, "Jonnie?" And his face was just covered, just like the first day that he came. And there was like a mask where he couldn't communicate anymore. And I'm sorry I'm emotional, but that's the reality. Jonnie, for me, is an icon of many children who don't have appropriate literacy experiences, and then people expect them to be able to do things that they've never learned to do, and they penalize them because they haven't. I think that there's no doubt in my mind that Jonnie had a learning problem. But exactly the nature of that problem, given that nobody ever gave him any stimulation and nobody ever really helped him to learn or expected him to learn until he was 12 years old, makes me think that there might have been other ways that he might have learned more.
Did you work with his Spanish at all? Did you use some of his Spanish background?
I did. I tried to communicate to him in Spanish. I could see that he had a little bit of auditory awareness. If I told him sit or come, he could look at me, and that may have helped him to begin to identify with me more. But I tried to use that and I didn't see, like he wouldn't say anything to me in Spanish. And if I said much to him, I saw him get nervous. And so I just mostly spoke in English because either he had this very quiet look on his face, or he began to reach out and show me that he was interested in what I was doing. So English seemed to be the way to go with him.